Hello, Boulder Bookstore community. My name is Heather Mateus, Sappenfield, and I am honored to be joining you today. I have a short story collection releasing on September 21st titled Lyrics for Rock Stars. And Stephanie Schindhelm was kind enough to invite me to speak to you and answer some questions. Thank you for inviting me, and to you, Stephanie, but to everybody at the store for keeping that special place vibrant during COVID. I have 8 questions here. I'm going to read the question and then answer it. And as you can see, I am outside. The first question inspired me to do this. And I thought, it's COVID. Why not? We all want to be outside getting some vitamin D. So here we go. The stories in this collection are all set in Colorado. Why does the Rocky Mountain landscape and its history play such an important role in your storytelling? Oh, well, I couldn't not be there. I am a Colorado native, and I've lived here in the Vail Valley for 30 years. It's just part of who I am. It's what I know, it's what I love, it's what I'm passionate about. And when I'm away from this place, I actually get a visceral craving in my bones for the crisp air, the visual beauty, the crunch of dirt or the squeak of snow underfoot. I love its prairies and its peaks and its canyon-riddled red deserts. The simple quality of its light. It's so beautiful here. And it is a part of who I am. I also, though, am fascinated by its history and the way it holds history. You'll see behind me, I'm here actually between Vail and Minturn, about a mile outside of Minturn, Colorado. This is a place I come in winter more often. I AT up this hill and ski down, but I hiked up here this summer because I pass this cabin all the time in the winter. And these are the kinds of things that fascinate me. And if you look at the layers here, that's Game Creek Bowl if you ski Vail, and on the top there's a white building. Maybe you can see that. That's Eagle's Nest and Eagle's Nest Ridge there. So the old, the new. This is called the lettuce fields because Vail used to be a lettuce producer, one of the top in the country. And I'm assuming that this was a lettuce rancher or lettuce farmer, but who knows? It could have been something else. If you look that way, it's just beyond. I'm not going to move the camera right now, but there's an old line shack from the ski area that used to be at Meadow Mountain that's on the curve right there at Dow Junction. If you go to places like Rome or Lisbon or Baltimore or Boston, history, there's lots of physical signs of history. In fact, we travel to those places to interact with them and gain insight into humanity. But out here in the West, people have had a different relationship with the earth, and especially our indigenous peoples. We have Mesa Verde, we have petroglyphs. They were stewards of the land, and they didn't change the land. And so history is so prevalent, but it's not as obvious in many ways. We tend to have, once the Europeans showed up, we have things like this cabin or this old road that goes up this mountainside that I'm on. And yet the effects are still there. So, of course, I'm going to write about that. It's in my blood and my bones. A story in the collection that actually addresses that is Clan. Oh, they all address it, but that I'm going to use right here. Clan is about 2 boys, being boys, and they're 4th graders up on Table Mesa, outside of Golden there. And they're playing around Castle Rock, and they find a burned stick. It's old. They end up digging it out of the ground. And it's obviously was part of a building that was burned, and one thing leads to another, and they learn about the Ku Klux Klan that used to hold rallies up there, and that knowledge and how a young boy who might be troubled interacts with that information and that history then leads to some consequences that force some difficulty for him and both the boys' families. So those things, I just don't think we can separate ourselves from place and from land, even when we're in cities and we're walking through areas. It's just prevalent for me.
Your previous work has been young adult fiction. How different is it to write short stories and to write with an adult audience in mind rather than a teen audience? Why did you decide to write short stories instead of another teen novel?
So I find this a really ironic time that I'm in. My short stories were actually widely published and have won awards. I've had 3 pushcart nominations before my young adult novels came out. And I don't consider myself an adult writer or a teen writer. I consider myself an everything writer, or maybe a type of everything writer. And that has to do with my process. So for me, I have mild dyslexia, and one of the ways it really manifests itself is I'm hugely big picture. And novels arrive for me just pretty fully formed, and they're almost always ushered by a narrator. And right now there's, 5 novels in my head, and they're all kind of in a cloud jockeying around up there. And all of them have their narrators. The surprises of story come in the details. Every once in a while, the ending will change, but for the most part, it's pretty fully formed. And I just need to decide which narrators, well, the voice that is loudest is the one that comes forth and is the next thing that's written. While it's parked in my mind and it's getting ready to be the thing that's written, I listen to that narrator and how the story wants to be told by that narrator. I trace its outlines and its edges and determine from that how the shape the story will take, and that determines its genre. That's how I come to story, and again, I write across all genres, but I write a type of writing, so you're going to find in my young adult novels that I like that. On my birthday, I found out that another great novel I wrote was the runner-up for the Kraken Prize at Pittsburgh Books, and that's going to be out in spring of 2022. And that's a middle grade novel that, again, is sort of literary. Once I know what genre I am writing and within the type of writer I am, I then do craft a story to fit what the reader's needs are for that age group. A middle grade novel will be no less complex. Young readers are smart and they're hungry for meaning and building their understanding of the world. And so it will be just as complex as an adult novel. However, the way that I'll present the material will be more straightforward and appropriate to their reading and comprehension levels. How long have you been working on these stories? Is this a life's work, or did you write these stories more recently? How did you decide on the order that the stories appear in your book? Is the order intentional, thematic, chronological? Okay, this collection I started over 20 years ago. When my daughter started talking at about a year old, she had the Australian accent of her daycare lady, and there's nothing wrong with an Australian accent. I was an high school English teacher at the time, and I had a paradigm shift. I thought, okay, I need to stay home with my daughter. So I resigned from my position, and we literally took our first wobbling steps together, me toward my career as a writer. A few years later, and some near misses with editors at magazines on stories, I realized I needed to hone my craft and decided an MFA was the way to do that. So I went to Pacific University's MFA in Writing program. An MFA isn't for everybody, but it changed my writing life and the course of my career, and I really learned a lot about craft. I unlearned some things that weren't serving me well from being a teacher, and started coming at it from the other end, which is where I always felt I should have been anyway, was on the other end of the spectrum. So while I was there for the MFA, short stories were the vehicle that worked best for learning, and I wrote 7 of the collection stories there. So after I finished my MFA, I kept writing stories, and then I had enough for a collection. and I submitted it to several contests. It was a finalist in all of them, but I thought, oh, there must be something I'm missing for it to continually be a finalist. So I set it aside and I set it in a drawer and came back to it actually about my daughter's 21st birthday. And that was about a year ago. And all of a sudden, I had grown enough that I could see how the stories fit together and how the stories themselves needed to be worked. And they spoke thematically well beyond themselves, and they were profound. So I restructured the collection into Songs of Innocence and Songs of Wisdom. And those two parts play off of each other literally, but also symbolically, ironically, universally. Once I did that and I revised the stories and braided those together within each section so that they reinforced that message, I sent it off to 2 different contests, and it was finalist for both of those. And then when I heard it had won the V Press Book Compilation Prize, which is how it is arriving in the world today, I said, yes, I'll take it. And I celebrated, and I'm so happy. And V Press, I can't say enough about how great they've been. I'm discovering this world of smaller presses and micro presses that are bringing these tremendously important and variety of books into the world that are outside of the traditional lanes, and it's just amazing. And this book, which also can look thematically at the roles of women in history. V Press was started by women, and the managing director and editor is survival of domestic abuse to the extent that she had a movie made about her. So to have this book coming out with this press, it feels so right. So yeah, I wanted to take a second though to talk about genre. So it's so interesting having these stories come out right now because so they had won these awards, and I'd had 3 pushcart nominations before I published the young adult novels. But because those were books and they came out, I've become known as a young adult writer. But I don't consider myself an anything writer. I consider myself an everything writer. And it's interesting with genre. I want to talk about types of readers and types of writers. So I am a type of reader and writer, and the type that I am is strong literary tendencies and well-crafted stories. Those are the stories I like to write, and those are the stories I love to read. And within that, I love books across all genres, whether they're middle grade, young adult, short story collections, romances, mysteries, you name it. As long as they're that type of book, I'm probably going to like it. And so I think that we are that kind of person from youth to old age. And I think that there are readers out there that are teens who are the type of reader who like literary books. They'll like my literary short stories. And I think there are adults out there who love young adult, that it's written maybe more plot driven and commercially driven. So yeah, I think it comes more down to what type of reader and writer you are, and then that's the type I am. And I write across genre because of that. Here's the view from the top. Not bad, huh? This is my living room. I'm up here, like I said, a few days a week. Love it. It's a great place to spend time, and I come in summer and winter. The trail gets tracked out. It's just beautiful. I am inspired, I will tell you, by adventure. I love adventure, and I've been lucky in my life. I have a body it's a good body, and it's allowed me to do some very adventurous things. I raced in the first mountain bike world championships. I did the Race Across America, a road bike race that started in San Diego and finished in Atlantic City, New Jersey. I did that on a 4-woman team. And I love to ski in the backcountry, and I've been a ski instructor and just done all kinds of things, 24-hour mountain bike racing. And I love that kind of adventure, physical adventure, but I'm even more intrigued, and you might be able to tell from the things I've told you, about internal adventure and about really looking deeply at yourself in those tough moments. And it could be something as small as, you know, dealing with someone at work that's driving you crazy, and what about that is making you nuts, and how can I treat that person with kindness, or deal with whatever's going on with me. And a lot of times I think that we do physical adventure as a means to tap into those deeper spaces of spirit. So I talked to you about how stories arrive pretty fully formed in my mind, and so what happens then is they stay there until whatever that adventure is going to be becomes more clear. And then once that's formed, that's when I know I've got a story and I'm ready to move forward. Hey everybody, here's the view from my living room up here, from the opposite side. What have you been reading during the pandemic to keep up your spirits? Oh, gee, I hadn't read mysteries in a long time, but I discovered Louise Penny this pandemic, and those Inspector Gamache novels. And again, I'm a type of reader, and those have those literary leanings with Inspector Gamache always reading and reciting poetry, and I just have loved them. And I think, you know, I was wondering why, because I'm just gobbling them up. I think I'm about halfway through right now, and I think it has to do with the structure, you know, and the predictability of a mystery. Like, there's going to be the murder, and it's terrible, and then there's sort of the developing all the clues and the doubting themselves about 2/3 of the way through, and then they get the murderer in the end. I think that structure feels really nice for me right now, but I also enjoy her writing, the depth of her characterization, and I love what I've learned about Quebec and traveling there, and their dual English-French culture, and the food. I think I've put on a few pounds, and I've been drinking a lot more wine. So yeah, that's what's been getting me through the pandemic. Are any of the characters you write about in your stories really you in disguise? How much of your life makes it into what you write? Every single, I think for lots of authors, like every single thing in your stories comes from something from your experience, right? At least in these stories, every story has seeds from my life. And they all branch quickly into fiction, like the idea or an experience or something that was powerful that struck me, and then it moves forward from there really quickly. And there are absolutely none of these characters that are me. I did discover, however, that I spoke through one of them, and it was a surprise when I was learning how the collection was supposed to fit together. But as an example, so Real Cowboy, I worked on a ranch, and I had a crush on a cowboy, and the owners of the ranch arranged a lunch for us that I thought was a date, and then realized, yeah, I don't want to, spoiler, sorry, but no, go ahead into the story. But I am in no way that character, and it's very different. But I remember the sense of that, and that's what I'm writing toward. The title story, Lyrics for Rock Stars, is one place where I found I spoke really directly through that character, and it surprised me. So in that story, there's a pregnant gold digger who is sitting on a rock in this beautiful valley, not unlike right where we're experiencing here, has this moment where she realizes the error of her ways through an encounter with a man whom she assumes is an impoverished hippie. But when she meets him again later, she realizes that he's a famous songwriter, and they have this exchange. She looked at him. So you're famous? You write songs? Even in this light, he was wiry, and he wore a t-shirt that read, "Let Love Rule." He reeked of marijuana. Tunes some, lyrics mostly. For rock stars, people I've heard of? Stars, sure. Do you need anything? Like who? He sat down, facing her, and took in her proportions. You're a Mini Cooper stretched into a caddy. No wonder you're revving so hard. People I'd hear on the radio? Well, I juice out my passions, my obsessions, and they breathe each day on the radio, live night after night after night on tours. I don't know if I'd like that, turning on the radio and hearing my life. He shook his head. Stubble furrowed his cheeks. I dig it. It makes me part of each body that grooves to my beat. I assumed for years that I identified more with the gold digger mother. There are a few moments there that I could really identify with. But in all honesty, all of a sudden, part of realizing this collection and its order, I realized I was speaking directly through that songwriter. And those were my author's words right there. And that's when I knew what the title of the collection needed to be and how it needed to be structured. I want to take a second, though, to talk about the story Rescue, too. That's another one where, I had an experience. That parking lot scene happened. I'm far from a supermodel, but that really happened, and I can still see that man's pain, and it still brings a tear to my eye. I knew I was going to write about that for sure, and I needed to find the narrator and the situation that fit with, and that would come up again later. But that was there, and so what I'm writing toward is actually the poignancy and the truth of each of these moments that have grow from those seeds within that fiction, and that's where I'm headed. That adventure where they're driven within. And so these are my lyrics. Each of these stories are my lyrics. Edmund Wilson said, no two persons ever read the same book. And so what I love is that each reader coming to these stories has their own beat. And so they take my lyrics and set them to the beat of who they are. And every time someone reads my stories, my lyrics, and put it to their beat, a new song is made. I think that's magic, isn't it? I mean, it's incredible, the miracle of the reading experience, and that's one of the reasons I love to write. Do you have a favorite story, and will you read an excerpt from one of your stories? So the answer to the first part is no, I don't have a favorite story. I love all my babies equally. I definitely will identify with one more than another on a certain day, but no, I love them all. And some authors say, well, it's the story I'm working on currently, and that could be true too. But I actually love all the things that I've written about the same. Today, I would like to read to you from The Rusty Knife, and my reasoning behind that is that we just recently, on August 18th, celebrated the centennial of women's right to the national vote. Pretty significant. And so I thought I'd address that today because this is a story about women being able to vote and women's rights and how it's evolved. And let me just clarify that some women earned the right to vote on that day. Don't even get me started. But luckily, some of us were able to vote on August 18th, 1920. Colorado had already had the right to vote for some time. So that'll be addressed in this story, as you'll see. The other reason I chose to come over here and read this, I was going to do this in my loft. Oh, there's a hawk flying overhead, you guys. And by the way, on the ride up here, I saw a grouse, a bear, and a deer. So, love it, the land. The other reason why I'm choosing to read this story too, again, about nature, is it's breezy up here today. And this story has a lot of wind in it, so I thought it might be appropriate. So, The Rusty Knife. Air rushed through Alma's stockings. She pedaled into the valley bottom, scanning about to ensure no one was near. Seeing only pines on the foothills and the occasional jutting fins of red rock, she hiked her new split skirt above her knees with one hand and steered her bicycle with the other. Daisies lined the dirt road, clinging to these last days before snow smothered them, bending in a wind that carried the tang of decay.
This was the first time Alma's legs had truly felt sunlight and wind, and she grinned at her emancipation from the heavy skirts that bunched on one side of the bicycle or the other, and sometimes caught in the chain, stopping the bike cold, flinging her down. She felt absolutely free. Anything seemed possible. Preston, she mused, would be thunderstruck if he could see her. It had pained him just to gift her this skirt. She frowned at the thought of donning a corset and high collar again. Her waist was dainty enough. Just last week, Susan B. Anthony had been quoted in the Rocky Mountain News. Why, pray tell me, hasn't a woman as much right to dress to suit herself as a man? As Alma had read aloud from the article, Preston had rocked back from his breakfast, frowning. Poor Preston. He bought her this bicycle 6 months ago to aid her recovery from scarlet fever. How could he have known it would lead to a marital campaign for liberty? This while women still do not have the national vote. Alma pressed her finger against Miss Anthony's article. I'll not abide a suffragette, Preston warned. Those despicable bloomers neither. Nothing so bifurcated. Alma sauntered over to drape herself across his lap. A split skirt still has grace. She smiled in the way that accentuated her dimples. Red surged above Preston's collar, and she knew that this battle would move to his bed, that there she'd win. Up the valley, 2 grazing bucks startled, legs wide, antlers gossamer. She watched them spring off, white tails like flags, until they veered away from a man astride a bay horse. His cowboy hat cast a wedge of shade that masked his eyes, but not his sneer. He seemed comprised of angles, and he held a rifle half-aimed where the deer had stood. He sighted Alma down its barrel. Heart pounding in her ears despite the wind, she smoothed her skirt back over her knees. The climb out of the valley began, and she drew on all her mettle to stare carefully ahead, yet from the corner of her eye that gun's barrel tracked her. She remembered Preston's grave face as she'd untied the ribbon and opened the box, holding this skirt. On top of it had been a matching jacket with Lego mutton sleeves and a jaunty hat with a feather. Alma had gasped, hugging them to her chest. When she found the pearl-handled knife in the bottom of the box, her eyes darted to Preston. Not all folks are so liberal-minded, he drawled. She grinned indulgently. Oh, Preston, it's 1896. Women here have had the vote for 3 years. Besides, you know those boys will be escorting me. Preston cocked his head. They may be scorchers, but they lack starch. At the clop of hooves, he moved to the window, nudged aside the curtain, and gazed down at the street. When he turned back, his face had lost its composure. I don't know what I'd do without you, Almy. What a fool she'd been. Right at this moment, those boys lounged in Colorado Springs, awaiting the afternoon train, indeed lacking the starch for this return ride to Denver. And that pocket knife lay crowded in her travel satchel, beneath her nightgown, her brush, a little tube of Vaseline to keep her lips from chapping, and the sewing kit she carried for when her skirt caught in the chain. Alma glanced down at the satchel bulging from her handlebar basket, wishing she could extract that weapon without stopping. A hog back rose perpendicular to the road, ending the valley. She wheeled past it, trying to relax, trying to put the man behind her. Never again, she told herself. Never again would she embark on a long outing alone. What had she been thinking? Miles of lonely road lay between her and civilization. She willed a picnic outing to replace the wind-whipped dust ahead, even just a couple courting. Her sweaty palms slid on the handlebars' cork grips. She shook her head. Preston had been correct. The road cut through a broad field with cattle grazing on both sides. Alma wished for the sustained speed of those scorchers. Denver folks bemoaned the lads who raced their bicycles through the horses, hansoms, trolleys, and pedestrians, but Alma had applauded their spunk. Until now. With one hand and the other, she smoothed back strands of tickling hair torn loose from her pompadour. A shot cracked across the wind. Alma swerved. To the west, pines bordered the field before climbing a hollow mountain. The man sat astride his horse at the forest edge, watching her. The butt of his rifle rested against his thigh, its barrel now pointed at the scudding clouds. Gritting her teeth, Alma pedaled faster. This was her third excursion this fall, and she realized she'd been lulled into confidence. Had Dora Reinhardt, who'd ridden 20 centuries in 20 days, or Annie Londonderry, a mother who'd wheeled around the entire globe, ever faced such peril? Alma glanced toward the trees. The man was gone. She recalled preening in Preston's bedroom mirror, tilting her head rakishly while he reclined and smoked a cigar on his bed. She'd glanced across the hall at her own bedroom's fainting couch, and when she'd looked back at her reflection, she'd found herself so pretty, so provocative, so dashing, so the new woman, that she'd leaned forward to kiss the glass. Preston chuckled. "Save those kisses for me, love." Alma had not been able to bring herself to wash her lips' fanning mark from that mirror. It seemed to represent something, and she would turn her face, tilting it so that her reflected kiss touched her live cheek. A ranch appeared, tiny in the distance. That's right, she remembered, a house, a barn, and a creek meandering beside it. She prayed someone was home. Halfway to the ranch, the man appeared, his horse cantering across the field toward her. Alma noticed his plaid shirt, but she still could not see his eyes. She imagined them sunken and savage. A track, probably from hay wagons, branched right, leading to a rock fin. Alma braked, dust rooster-tailing as she veered down the road shoulder, rolling fast along the bumpy route. One boot winged off the pedals, and she barked her shin, tearing her stocking. She climbed back up, pushing with all her might until her cadence grew rapid again. Her chest felt close to bursting. Glancing back, she found the man had slowed his horse to a trot, yet followed. It occurred to Alma, like a slap, that the ranch was his, that this land was his. She pedaled on, the pins in her hair wriggling loose till it unfurled. Arriving at the fin, chest heaving, she wheeled to its far side. She lurched off her bicycle, snatching her satchel. She ripped open the bag and groped beyond her nightgown, her sewing kit, the Vaseline, and found the pearl-handled knife. She pinched open its cold blade and glimpsed in it her distorted reflection. The jaunty hat had listed down to one ear. With a mingled cry, she tore it off. She kissed that reflection for luck and understood the hope in her lips' mark on that mirror back home. She almost sobbed. Alma listened for hooves, yet heard only her own ragged breaths. The rock emitted a puzzling yeasty scent like rising bread. She peeked around its edge, but the man was not in the track. To the south, she had a clear view of the landscape, but he was not there either. To the north, she was blind. Alma pressed her back to the grainy rock, still warm from the morning sun. Her hair whipped across her face, and her flayed stocking trailed in the wind as she considered her adversary. She could never unhorse him. She could perhaps mount her bicycle and flee, hoping for the element of surprise. The idea of him sighting her down his rifle's barrel stopped her, though. At least here, she had a fighting chance. She remembered sitting with Preston in the stands at Buffalo Bill's Wild West, marveling at the agility of the women on horses, at Annie Oakley, who'd ridden a bicycle no-handed while taking aim with a rifle and shattering every target. Alma wished she carried a gun, or had at least practiced the thrust of this knife. She tried jabbing out now. Clenching her teeth, she jabbed again. She remembered Frances Willard's book on learning to ride a bicycle. That book, penned by the founder of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, was what had finally persuaded Preston to splurge $100 on this Stearns bicycle. The will is the wheel of the mind, Miss Willard had written. All fail was from a wobbling will rather than a wobbling wheel. She'd made cycling seem a religious experience. Alma hadn't given two hoots about that. She just wanted to escape the prison of her house and the watchful dowager next door. Now, to staunch tears, Alma whispered, "The will is the wheel." Then, "I am the new woman." A horse nickered. Alma squared her shoulders. The man stepped swiftly around the rock. His face was weather-beaten and lean, and his lip bulged with tobacco. His eyes were not sunken, but they were dark and indeed savage as they raked over her. The wind yanked at her split skirt, defining her legs. Gaze lingering there, he hissed, "Hussy," then spit, aiming so it landed in the gap between her feet. Alma gripped the knife. To find out what happens, you'll have to read the rest of the story. I'd love your support if you bought the book. Thanks for joining me today. Be well.